Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. And I'm looking forward to discussing smart data practices for AI-driven research. So, first and foremost, who are we as Citrine Informatics? We provide an AI-driven software platform as well as expert technical services to enable product innovation through AI and machine learning. Now, we've been around for over 10 years. We've been operating within the chemicals and materials space effectively. We've learned a lot, and we've incorporated that into how we approach and solve these problems across the industry. Just to give a little bit of insight in the types of customers that we work with, it's broad and ranging across the industry between some of the largest personal care companies, specialty chemicals companies, adhesives and sealants companies. We've seen many types of problems and help solve those by working with our customers, by providing them the tools to solve these problems. Now, what will we be discussing today? Essentially, data and AI at three different levels. So first and foremost, how does a company ensure that they do have AI-ready data? There's a lot of discussion around this. What does this mean? And how do we see this from our perspective? And next will be, how does a manager support their team to follow best data practices by using that data and getting value out of it? So from that managerial perspective, what's our insight? And finally, from the individual researcher perspective, how can that individual contributor identify what data, what features, what's important for a project to learn, to solve, to improve, and again, to gain value from this work? So this will be the overview of what we'll discuss today. Now, what have we seen across the industry? Citrine has been working on these problems since 2013. So we do believe we have a broad view that is representative of how the industry functions. So on this plot here, just showing that the types of data that we encounter, and what hopefully is drawing your attention is that big blue circle on the left with what is typical. So since 2013, seeing thousands of types of problems in these industries, about 60% of the time, we're dealing with small data in localized files, semi-structured, like Excel or a small database. Quite often it is fewer than 100 data points in an Excel file. This is not the exception to the rule. And why is that? When folks are dealing with these types of product development and materials challenges within the industry, data is expensive to gather. Experiments are hard to run. Experts take time to develop and make these materials. It's always going to cost money to do those experiments. So naturally, there will always be small amounts of data. And not just that it's expensive to gather, but by developing new products, by innovating, these teams, these experts are always pushing the boundaries. So we're not dealing with fishing in our own pond. It's exploring new materials, new challenges. So we're always dealing with small data sets that are localized to new domains. Knowing that, how do we suggest tackling those problems? Get started. Just get started. That's what it boils down to. You're never going to have enough data. Never. You always start with these small data sets. So whether it be 0 data points, tens of data points, maybe 100 if you're lucky, get started, learn what you can from that data. But what's really key is picking the right place to get started. So picking a project, picking an engagement, something that has clear business value. And this is for many reasons, because from the top down, if a project is focused on solving a challenge that will bring the team value, that gets everybody's attention across the organization. From the C-suite through the managers down to the individual contributors saying, I used AI to solve a problem that was valuable to the business. That is instantly motivating up and down an organization. That also allows the team to learn about that data within this valuable domain. So picking the right project is the most critical first step for getting started. It's starting from the end and working backwards. Where is this going to be valuable? And that, given success of those projects, that's what catalyzes the ongoing excitement, what causes these efforts to spread, take hold, and to change an organization. Once you see success and how that success was generated, that's what turns into a successful data strategy. So learning what you need to have success then drives how you define and implement that success. What data will I need? How do we gather it? How do we automate that? How do we streamline that? Seeing the success should be the precursor to defining how you tackle these problems. And once you start to develop that and implement that, then you start to scale that approach. Start from the end, work backwards, act quickly, see value. And that's exactly what we've seen. So generally from an infrastructure and a data perspective, start small, show value, scale from there. What we've seen across the industry many, many times is a chorus of, we need to organize our data. Let's get our system set up, maybe deal with an electronic lab notebook or a laboratory information management system. That can often be a disheartening approach to scientists because there's no clear value to the folks doing the work as they gather the data and structure it into a system. Often there can be the hope of down the line value of seeing the use of this data. But in the interim, a lot of these projects often stall because there's no incentive for the scientists, for the engineers to put their data into these systems. And these efforts can often lead towards unproductive conclusions. So that's where we say start with that value-focused goal and work backwards. Targeted initiatives that clearly will demonstrate value to everybody involved. And then using AI as a motivating factor. So helping scientists to adopt these practices, because as opposed to hoping for eventual value, they can see immediate value in the work that they do. As scientists use AI to model their data to explore new experiments, they see the value of helping to do better experiments, having models uncover insights from their data that they may not have learned before. That's what drives enthusiasm, adoption, and ultimately scaling that value across projects, across teams, and across organizations. The keys to success that we see in these factors, having tools that are user-friendly, so that we want to decrease the barrier to all of these hardworking scientists, engineers, product developers to use a tool to see that value, making sure getting that data in and using it simple, easy, effective, and intuitive. And empower those that are closest to the work, because that data has a lot of context, a lot of knowledge. For the folks gathering this data, they have years or decades of experience. So give them the ability to know and pick and choose what is relevant, to stick it together, and then use that data in solving their problems. Also, from that leadership perspective, create incentives. So make sure that the folks using these tools are incentivized to show value, to get visibility, to solve problems that are clearly valuable to the business. That creates a reason for folks to use these tools to solve these problems. And then ultimately, even if a new tool is user-friendly, new tools still take time. So make sure the time can be dedicated and resources can be allocated for those teammates to pick up, use, adopt, and learn about these tools. Now, how does Citrine tackle this challenge? Our view is, starting from the end and working backwards, that AI-driven platform for optimizing experimental workflows, data has to come from all sorts of different sources. So initially, teams can provide their data in a structured Excel file, drag and drop that in a simple user interface, and be up and running. Scaling across an organization, folks know how to structure their data in spreadsheets. That's all it takes to get up and running. So giving this and empowering the scientists to take their data and to get started. That's our first step. But next, we understand that organizations have well-structured data in electronically stored systems, creating pipelines to those systems if they're needed. So automatically pulling in that data, taking more burden off of the team, both from ELN, LIMS, ERP systems, or future experimental test measurements. Having the ability to pipe that data in to get up and running quickly, absolutely critical, and that's often a use case that our customers get to once they've seen value within the platform. And then those other challenging data sources, often scribbled lab notebooks, messy Excel files that are very personalized. There's a lot of information and knowledge in those. So from our perspective, we want to make sure that data can still be brought in, and that's where Citrine Data Preparation Services comes into play. So we are happy to help in those edge cases in which the data is a bit messy and hard to wrangle. We know if it's valuable to you, we can find a way to get it into the platform and minimize that work on your shoulders. So it's a multifaceted approach to bring in all of the data that's relevant to your team to get started. Now, what does this look like? Next, we'd like to show you within the Citrine platform how simple it is to get up and running with data that your team might have. So how do we get started quickly? This is a view of the Citrine platform of where we would like to get to. So let's imagine I'm formulating new paints. The goal is to take my data, bring it into Citrine, build AI models to predict the things that I care about, focus those models, and then ultimately use them to optimize my materials. So to make better paints, better products as quickly as possible. Now, if I'm trying to perform this, how do I get started? Step one really is as simple as taking your data, drag and drop it into the platform, and upload it. I can take that data set, what I've gathered, and turn this into the foundation of creating AI models and optimize materials within the Citrine platform. Now, what does this look like as soon as we have our data on the platform? Once our data is in the platform, it's key as the expert to understand what we're looking at, to know, okay, how does my experimental work really look within this software? I can explore, I can see the range of properties. What have I measured? What have I not? Do I see any outliers within the types of formulations that I've made before? And if I find one of those to look interesting, I can dive into the details. Here I can see an overview of an experiment that I've done before. So a complex formulation, I've mixed together these materials. This is intuitive and this makes sense to me. But what's helpful is that maybe I'm really interested in optimizing the surfactants as part of my materials. Here I can see what I've used before. This complex chemical structure makes sense to me as a chemist and a formulator. I can see the properties of those materials. I understand the HLB value. This is a good place to start. Citrine has my data, and now I can use it to start optimizing the products that I want to develop. Now, what we just showed was how the Citrine platform is meant to facilitate the work of a scientist, an engineer, a product developer, get up and running quickly, take the data you have, focus on solving your challenges, and get going to meet them where they are at. What we are trying to avoid is draining motivation and delaying value, pitfalls we often see across the industry. If the folks doing the work are spending an exorbitant amount of time on data entry, that's delaying their time of doing the work that they want to be doing, of taking their data, of running new trials, new experiments, and learning from that data. We want to avoid this step of digitizing data for the sake of digitizing data, or potentially the promise of far off value that might not materialize. Now, this is our vision at Citrine. It's to free the scientists, let them do the sciencing. Check Oxford English Dictionary. I think that's in there. And the first step of this, we showed one aspect of this, taking an Excel-based data file that most scientific people are familiar with, put it in the platform, and then you're up and running. The next step and continued growth of Citrine is to take more of this intelligible, semi-structured or partially structured data, drag and drop that, have the platform interpret that information, even if it's not perfectly structured, and then use that to get up and running. So take those PDF files you have for new ingredients, new materials, drag and drop that, let the system do the hard work for you, make sure that the expert in the loop can validate that what is being interpreted is actually correct and usable, and then get back to the work that those experts really thrive in. So next, we'd like to showcase something that we're very excited about. So drag and dropping these PDF files of TDS sheets or SDS sheets, automatically interpreting that data, and then plugging that right into those workflows that the scientists can really benefit from and show value from very quickly. So what does this look like? Now, as a formulator, I'm ready to get up and running quickly. I have some new materials that I want to test. So these might be new products from my suppliers, or maybe something that a colleague has across the lab, and I want to see, can I use this in my application? Just drag and drop that TDS into the Citrine platform and see where it gets us. So on the right, you can see, here's a new material that I've never used. Within my paint formulations, I've already dealt with a handful of surfactants, but there's a lot of information within these technical data sheets that are provided for this brand new material that I've never tried before. So brand new to me, I can still double check and see all the information within this sheet in a user-friendly manner, but without having to go through all the effort and work of transcribing every single one of these properties, Citrine can help me take this information and translate it into a machine-readable format that can plug right into the workflows that I've already developed. So you can see a large amount of information is just pulled automatically from these sheets. a high level description. What is this material? How might I use it? I can learn a bit about this. But then also the properties. So this is critical. We saw before some of the surfactants that I used before. I knew as an expert that those HLB values could be really important to the predictive capability of how my formula could perform. I've seen that Citrine can intelligently pull that information from this sheet and link it back to the data set that I'm dealing with and line that up and say, a lot of my materials already have this HLB value. Let me make sure that this data stitches together properly. If I want to make any changes, I can come in, update, change these values if need be. But then also looking and expanding, what are these other properties that maybe I haven't investigated before, but could be pulled and could be useful for making these models more predictive, more helpful, more useful to help me make better products faster. Things like the hydroxyl value, something that I never explored before, the percent actives. And maybe if I have some information, I want to change something, I want to change values from categoricals to integers to numericals, change the units because it's more helpful for how I think about my systems. This is where the validation step is so important. I'm letting Citrine do a lot of the legwork up front for me, but still, with me being the expert, I get the final say to validate what information is being pulled in, how I'm going to use this. You can see a whole host of information is automatically pulled. That saved me a lot of time, so I don't need to do this manually. But maybe something is missed. Maybe I know something more about these materials. I can add in a property myself. Pretty convenient to append that information to what can be pulled automatically. But then also understanding, what is this material and how am I using it? Seeing that Citrine is able to link this together and understand there's a lot of surfactants already within my data set. This looks like another surfactant. So putting that under that same label, there's a lot of helpful information that will allow me to make the best use of the properties and information about this material. Now, here's one material, here's one data set, but there's also some other information, some other surfactants that I'm interested in exploring, and we can see that same process, just as easy with a new surfactant. Even though those data sheets are formatted a little bit separately, we can still automatically pull that information, link it together, and get us up and running to get back to the lab, doing the experiments as fast as possible without wasting time on transcribing all this data by hand. So that's really helpful to me, letting me as a scientist get back to doing the work that I want to do, not spending time transcribing data for the sake of transcribing data. So that's the implementation of this vision within the Citrine platform. Let the scientists do the sciencing. Take that PDF, that information, what you have on hand, drag and drop it, facilitate the ease of bringing that information into your workflows with some validation from the experts, but just getting you up and running as fast as possible. That's really what we're striving for. With that in mind, we'd like to transition to this idea of what makes data AI ready. Okay. So first and foremost, thinking in terms of the inputs that you control and the outputs that you're trying to optimize. These development workflows are often complex, many connected materials, processing steps, the ingredients, making sure that all stays linked to understand and better model your process leads towards better outputs. So making sure that the materials that you deal with, the experiments, are clearly linked with unique material IDs, and the context of all of this work is laid out and stitched together. So starting where you start and ending where you end, building all of that information into robust models is what enables efficient development and experimental workflows. And also in terms of the data itself, what you gather and how you use it, a diversity of data is very important. This idea of not always fishing in the same pond. So if you have a large amount of data, but it's all very localized with very small amounts of changes, that can often be much less impactful than a small amount of data with a large diversity. And so AI and machine learning models are very effective at capturing information that spans a high number of degrees of freedom, a lot of changes that we as humans and scientists and product developers, we can't understand all that complexity inherently. But that high degree of complexity is easily dealt with within machine learning and AI workflows. On top of that, make sure that your data is consistent and structured and intelligible. So if you're measuring properties within the same units, that's always helpful. understanding the difference between batches and different experiments. So tools like Citrine provide opportunities to help normalize and ensure that your data is structured and consistent so that these learnings can really be applied and grow upon each other. And last but not least, make sure the data is relevant. So often we hear this idea of, I've got 50 years of data, we can learn a lot from that. Unfortunately, a lot of that older data ends up missing context. So maybe being measured on equipment that's now no longer in service, or the knowledge of the experts that took those data points has been lost to time because it wasn't properly recorded. So we tend to find the same idea of working backwards. Focus with the most recent, most relevant data and grow and expand as is needed. But often some of that older data doesn't tend to be as relevant. And one final tip for this idea is defining clear objectives and knowing your results and goals. So this comes back to start with the end goal, start with the project, start what's valuable, and work backwards. That will really inform and direct how you capture the data and how you use it. So next, in terms of our topics of discussion, how can an R&D manager support their team to follow these practices in the best way possible? Recognition really matters. So when your team is working on these efforts to gather this data, to model data, to begin working in new ways, incorporating AI and machine learning into their workflows, you want to make sure that those team members are rewarded, recognized, and have visibility for the good work that they are doing. So create that structure to generate recognition for your team. And also give them time. Again, the best systems, the onboarding and the training and the adopting to this methodology of working should be as streamlined as possible, but still making sure that there is time to dive in and to take this new approach and to expand and explore and learn with it. So give teams the time to learn these systems, to curate their data, and to begin this new process. This really does set the foundation, because this well-curated data, it doesn't just solve today's problems. It sets the vision for how to approach these problems in the future, for how to structure your data, for how to think about product development and scientific work. So doing this appropriately is really what allows that expansion to facilitate that change management across an organization, to make sure that you can be successful not just on the individual or team level, but on an organization-wide level. And what's really critical from a management perspective is understanding this no-blame data culture. For years and years, the scientific community has talked about and continues to talk about the value of failed experiments. So from a modeling perspective, knowing what does not work is so important, and not just only seeing successful data points. So a machine learning and AI approach gives you numerical ways to take advantage of that data. When you know what fails, that helps you learn what does not fail. So making sure that there's this space where folks feel safe in bringing failures to the team, because that improves the process, that improves the models, that improves the data, and ultimately makes everybody more effective and efficient in this work and for the work. And one example of this is the original penicillin specimen shown on the right. That was certainly not expected. These data points that were not developed through a rigorous process. Sometimes it is by chance, some chances of success, some chances of failures. Making sure that the team feels safe and taking advantage of learning from those failed experiments, or really leaning in and optimizing those unintended successes in the same way. And last but not least, we really want to talk about this from the individual contributor perspective. So how does a researcher identify what data and features are most important for a project? With our experience across the industry, here are 4 of the main aspects in ensuring you can have the most relevant data for these AI projects. First and foremost, your experts and their knowledge. They have years or decades of intuition and experience. Giving them ways to put their domain knowledge and expertise into their data, into their models, to incorporate that for this project and for those that they train in the future to achieve the best results possible. Make sure that you have ways to put their expertise into your workflows so you're not reinventing the wheel. A big part of that is statistical analysis, using it tools to explore your data, to understand what features are really predictive of those outputs that you care about. So seeing that in a data-driven fashion to either confirm or to counteract long-held intuition. letting the numbers bear out your next course of action, visualizations and statistical analysis is absolutely critical. And the next would be iterative testing. Scientists, product developers, you rarely solve the problem with the first experiment. And that's okay. Going back to that, fostering a no blame of data culture. The key is knowing that when you run a new experiment, that is valuable information that should feed back into your systems, into your knowledge and your intuition to help inform the next experiment. Understand that these workflows are always going to be iterative. And with every new data point you gather, that gives your AI system more ammunition to really train, learn, and do a better job of helping you accomplish your objectives. And that leads to the last point of you have to jump in. You really do. And scientists and engineers are often hardwired to focus and optimize and iterate before ever taking that first step. Honestly, sometimes due to that fear of failure. But we have to understand that sometimes you can't have the perfect answer right off the bat, and you just have to do experiments, even if the uncertainty is high, even if you might not solve that problem. This ends up being effective because you can explore more efficiently, learn more, and generate success as you go, understanding that sometimes you just have to jump in. So with that, we'd like to showcase what do some of these data strategies look like within the Citrine platform? How can you use your data for these AI-driven workflows? So now coming back to this exercise of optimizing paint formulations where I've brought my data to the table and I'm going to use Citrine to help explore my data, to look and see if there are trends or if there's information that can help me learn more about my system. So I can explore and see if properties that I care about, like the viscosity or the gloss, maybe that varies with the amount of thickener in the formulation. So making sure that I have tools to explore that data, that can help me learn from this data that I do have that I spent so long to collect. And then if there are certain plots that I think are helpful to explain something that I really think are going to be valuable to my team, saving those, making sure that these are reusable, interpretable, these can help get across points to my teammates. If I want to show them that how important is that amount of surfactant in my formulation compared to that viscosity that I know is critical to hitting my customers' targets. This allows me to learn and also communicate with my teammates. And that's just from the data itself. So what can I learn about the properties of the materials as I bring them to the table? But what comes next is, what do these AI and machine learning models bear out from the data itself? So I'm building these predictive models for all of the properties that I care about, and I want to understand what is it about these properties that matter to me that can help inform my understanding of the system, that can help me do better experiments. So for something that I care about quite significantly, the viscosity of my system, the 24-hour viscosity, Citrine's helped me build this predictive model where I have some high quality statistical information about the ability to predict this property that matters to me. And I'm seeing what is helping to predict this. So part of this does align with my intuition. Like I was thinking before, the amount of surfactant, that affects the viscosity. That makes sense. That's a good gut check for me. It gives me more trust in the system. But there's also some more information. Things like the number of hydrogen bond donors for my materials helps predict the viscosity. That's something new. Maybe I wouldn't have hypothesized that. And yeah, it does make sense with my my intuition, but I wouldn't have thought of that. So maybe that helps kickstart some new ideas for when I perform my next round of experiments. And what's really important is not just seeing what factors impact those outputs, but how they impact those outputs. So here we have these feature impact plots giving very, very realistic, helpful insight into the nature in which these factors play to affecting the outputs that I care about. Within chemicals and materials development, we often have very nonlinear, rapid onset effects. And that's exactly the type of information we want to extract from this data. Not everything can be fit with a straight line. So seeing how we can have effects that tend to rise and level off or proceed through a maxima as they go up and down, what matters is learning from our data so that we can use it to help direct the next best experiment. So in this way, these models and these systems, help the learning that then helps direct the next rounds of experiment, and then all leads towards doing better experiments, making better products, and ultimately achieving our objectives faster than we would have before. So that was one example of how you can use your data in an AI-driven workflow to help learn from your information and to optimize your product development and your scientific work. And now the question is, how do you reuse that data? How can you continue to benefit from all that you've gathered and learned from? And how we have seen a lot of success in this attempted reuse of data boils down to leveraging those similarities when they're relevant. So for folks working in a paints and coatings application, understanding that there's lots of information to learn about the viscosities of those surfactants and how they affect the formulations, that's slightly different work than someone optimizing a shampoo formulation, but there still could be some overlapping use of those surfactants, the additives, the materials. There could be some cross learnings there. So making sure that those scientists and product developers, that they're not siloed, so they can have access to the data that might be relevant to their teams, that empowers them to learn from each other so that those data and that knowledge can compound and really show broad benefits across an entire organization. So having the proper way to combine those data sets and that knowledge across an organization, that's absolutely critical for those working on the data and on the teams involved in those types of development workflows. What does this look like practically, and coming down to the nitty gritty of those AI model developments? Quite often, if you're dealing with similar chemical structure, similar materials, there's a lot of fundamentals about what those materials are that are relatively invariant. So the periodic table hasn't changed a lot in the last few years. So making sure we learn about the chemicals and materials from one application, there's a lot that can be scaled to the next application. And there's ways to build that within these platform models to stitch together that data to give you better predictive capability across multiple applications. And not just from the chemicals and materials, the ingredients perspective, but also the processes. So if there are similar unit operations, similar modes of processing materials and different phenomena involved in those, finding ways to incorporate that and build those into models that can have learnings across these applications, letting your teams collaborate and build those together, that can have, again, compounding effects to really improve the efficiency and outputs across an entire organization. With that being said, a lot of the information present within this webinar is available on our website. Feel free to scan this QR code if you'd like to learn a bit more about some of the details that maybe weren't discussed in depth, or feel free to reach out. We're happy to have further discussion around our thoughts and what we've seen in our decade plus of solving these problems and these challenges with AI within the materials and chemicals industry. And finally, to summarize, you have enough data to do AI right now. This is not the future, this is the present. For those saying you're not ready, it takes time, that is not our experience. You can get started now. And how do you get started? Start small, show value, focus projects that are going to bring value across an entire organization. And if you have any desire to explore or work with our experts on this process, we'd be happy to discuss our experience, our knowledge, and what we've seen across the industry in rolling out AI for your materials and chemicals development problems. So with that, I'd like to pause, thank you all for your time, and look forward to answering any questions that you might have.